I recently got to spend the day enjoying two incredible 1940s era aircraft, a P-51 Mustang and an AT-6D, commonly called a T-6. I had the chance to interview both pilots on these aircraft, and I wanted to share their thoughts on owning and flying these respective Warbirds. These interviews were part of a full day where I got to shoot some photos of the P-51 flying in formation with the T-6 and an RV-14 to boot, while I sat in the back of the T-6 with the canopy open. Be sure to check out that video if you haven't already. But if you wondered what it's like to be a P-51 pilot or owner, or if you wanted to know how flying a T-6 compares to flying a Pitts, then these interviews are for you. In this video, you'll hear about the ownership group of this P-51, what it's needed to get qualified to fly this plane, what it's like to fly, and why this nonprofit doesn't do public rides. On the T-6, you will learn more about the plane's history, the piloting experience, and how it flies compared to the Pitts. Let's jump into Darren and Jeff discussing the flying and ownership experience of these two incredible planes. Now let's hear from Darren about being part of the ownership group for the P-51 and what it's like to fly it.
So yeah, a group of guys back in the early 70s got together and decided it'd be cool to open up a museum, create a 501c3 nonprofit, and then operate the airplane, show it to the public, take it to air shows and demonstrate it. And members of that museum that come through and move on, and they're looking basically for pilots who are qualified to fly it and willing to show it. In general, qualifications are, insurance is a minimum of 100 hours of T6 time, but ideally you have a few thousand hours of tailwheel time overall, and then you have to go through a whole checkout procedure to qualify to fly this. It's not that hard to fly, but there's some unique things. It's a liquid cooled engine, so you generally have 100 degree to 110 degree sort of green band of temperatures, and you hit 121 degrees and you sort of ruin the engine, or you warp the engine, you have to pull it out, you have to likely either rebuild it or at least service it, and so you have an 11 degree band between everything's good and everything's not good. That's different than basically any other airplane most people would fly. It's heavy, it's an 8,000 pound airplane just sitting here, so it's a heavy tailwheel airplane. 11 foot 2 inch diameter prop that's heavy, and so there's a lot of everything when you go to take off. You got torque, P factor, slipstream effect, gyroscopic precession, all those things. All the forces you learn about as a person learning to fly, except it's on steroids. So you don't cob the power, because if you do that, you get all that torque and it wants to go left. You get the left turning effect. You get the when you raise the tail, it wants to go left, again because of gyroscopic precession. So all those forces are in pretty extreme view when you fly it, and so everything's just a little bit slower. You bring the power up a bit slower. It's got a steerable tail wheel, so it's not unstable on takeoff. And then otherwise, it's a geared engine too, so it's not quite 2 to 1. It's about 1.75 or so to 1. So on takeoff, the engine's spinning at 3,000 RPM. Which means the prop is roughly half of that. So the prop would be, going at about, call it 1,700, something like that, RPM. And then back at cruise, we run it at 2,300 RPM, which means the prop's going at about 1,200 RPM. So it seems strange to be cruising along at, 200 and some odd knots indicated, and that prop is just barely turning.
Loping.
Yeah, just loping along. But otherwise, it's got a wide gear, so it's surprisingly stable. It's more stable than the T6 is, especially on landing. It just goes faster, it's heavier. There's more things if you don't manage the power right that you can do to hurt yourself in terms of either exit the runway, stage left, or on short final. They've had accidents where people go around, maybe someone's stuck on the runway, and so they push the power in to go around. And if you push too much in at too slow a speed, especially if you're uncoordinated, they've had accidents where these airplanes roll over. So, a judicious go around, thoughtful application of power, level off, let it accelerate, slowly clean it up. So as long as you fly it with the right technique, it's an amazingly nice flying airplane.
Now, as far as giving rides for fundraisers, didn't they change all those?
Yeah, it's tricky.
Getting real complicated.
It is, yeah, it's tricky. So
Reading about that.
We comply with all the rules. We'll share costs, but we don't charge money. There are organizations where like up in Oregon where I live, I think it's $2,600 for a 30-minute ride.
Yeah.
And they're obviously making money. You don't really make money on these, but that's what it costs to run these things. But they they do theirs as basically a a tourist thing where they have to do the 100-hour inspections, do all the things you would do to be able to legitimately.
Oh,
give
so
people-
that increases the cost of doing that, having 100 hours versus the
Yep.
ambulance.
Exactly.
Yeah, so that's a trade-off.
It is, and then they have to have all the insurance for that. So
Yeah, doesn't the CAF do those also?
they do. Yeah,
That's what I thought,
exactly.
yeah.
So yeah, you have to have the insurance to do it all, and then obviously all the inspections and everything to do it properly. And so.
Now let's hear from Jeff Lowe, a pilot who likes to go from big to small, who flies both the T6 and a Pitts. Let's learn a little more about this T6 and what it's like to fly, and how does it compare to his Pitts?
Yeah. So this is an AT-6D, one of the more common variants of the T6. In the Army Air Corps, it was the T6, and the Navy was the S&J, and it was the Harvard for the Brits and the Commonwealth. But this was the advanced trainer. It was the last trainer that a pilot could fly before they got into a single-engine fighter like a Mustang or a P-47. The group has had this airplane since late 60s, early 70s, and it has been training pilots in the group to fly the Mustang just as it did back in World War II in the early 1940s. Has a Pratt & Whitney R1340 radial engine, 600 horsepower, slightly supercharged. We can get to 36 inches, but we run it a bit lower than that just to get some more longevity out of the engine. We run it up to about 32 inches for takeoff, rather than the full 36 inches. The airplane is great to fly. Like I say, it's easy to fly. It's hard to fly well. It as a trainer, it needs to be able to challenge the pilot. So getting around the edges of the envelope, nibbling at the stall. Got to be on the rudders, not to drop a wing into stall, and you can do things like it's very easy to say pull too hard at the top of the loop and do a snack roll or a spin out the top of the loop. So got to learn to manage the energy, the mass of the airplane. It's a lot heavier than the single engine trainers that most people fly these days that are maybe 2,000 or 3,000 pounds, where this is max gross weight of 5,300 pounds.
Wow.
So there's a lot of mass, and it's a tail dragger. So that's one of the things to always be mindful of on landing is the rudder isn't that big for the size of the airplane. So there's a lot of momentum, and once it starts swinging, it's going to be very hard to stop it. So pay attention to the speed as you're rolling out. Make sure you get the tail down on the ground so you can get that steering and that stability from the tail wheel, rather than just relying on the rudder as the airspeed bleeds off and you lose effectiveness.
Now you also fly a Pitts, so compare this to the Pitts.
So yes, I fly a single seat Pitts Special S1S, whereas this is 600 horsepower and 5,300 pounds. My Pitts is maybe 230 horsepower and 1,100 pounds. So much higher power to weight, accelerates much better, it's much lighter, much more nimble. Does things a lot more quickly.
Oh yeah, I'll bet.
You are always doing little jabs with the rudder pedals to keep the thing going where you want it to go when you're on the ground. Because it does react so quickly. You can't put in a big rudder input or it will swing towards the side of the runway. It's a little jab to get it going the other direction, maybe a little more, then a little back. So your feet are always tapping. If you look at the rudder on a Pitts when it's rolling out on the runway, you'll see it just like vibrating as the pilot is just jabbing at the pedals to keep
Dancing on it.
Yes.
Whereas this plane probably a little more controlled motions on the rudder.
It's a little slower, but like I said, it does have that mass. It has that momentum, so you can't let it get away, or you may not be able to get it back. So it is more likely to ground loop than something like the Mustang, which also has that much wider gear that makes it more stable.
Right. Okay. Oh, fun. All right. Thanks a lot, Jeff. I look forward to flying in it,
Yeah.
I should say. I want to thank Jeff and Darren for allowing us the opportunity to experience these incredible planes and taking the time to help us learn more about owning and flying them. I'm glad that I was able to share some of this experience with you. It was an incredible day. If you haven't already seen it, be sure to check out my video on our experience riding in these planes. I will put a link in this video's description below. It was quite an adventure. Thanks for coming along on another Silva adventure, and be sure to subscribe so you can join me on the next one. I'd love to hear what you thought of this in the comments below. See you again soon.